a wolf among sheep. I wish, when I wish. No blade can pierce me. My teeth, my claws are spears. A hurricane! You will burn.
What do you see when a giant dragon lies fast asleep on a mountain, flooded with gold? An ultimate challenge for heroes, or a legend waiting for dreamers? To those who truly hold the destiny of Middle-earth, the evil dragon Smaug is absolutely not a guard beast. It is a devastating calamity, silently accumulating its wrath, just waiting for the exact moment Lord Sauron raises his banner to turn the entire north into a plain of ashes. That is exactly the apocalyptic vision that Gandalf saw, and to prevent it, the Grey Wizard wove the most cold-blooded life-and-death move in history. He pushed 13 proud dwarf warriors and an innocent hobbit to death's door, using their very pain and thirst for national restoration as bait, while absolutely concealing the entire horrifying truth about the scale of this chessboard. Do not let the illusion of a heroic adventure deceive you. Today, let us step into the darkest corner in Gandalf's mind to witness the cruel and bloody price of wisdom. These are not groundless, fanciful speculations. This is exactly what the historical records truly speak when you trace their entire trail, from beginning to end, through the main storyline of The Hobbit, through the appendices, through unfinished tales, up to the handwritten letters of J.R.R. Tolkien himself, where the true architecture of the quest of Erebor is finally made clear. And once you see through this picture, the brilliant fireworks at the Green Dragon Inn will look to carry a completely different color. This is the core question that this video revolves around. Did Gandalf the Grey, the wandering Istari who knocked on a round green door and arranged a contract over a tea and cake table, ever stand close enough to Smaug the Tremendous to look straight into its great fiery eye? And if he did, what did the evil dragon see when glaring back? Let us begin at the very place Tolkien himself began, when he recreated the true story. Not in the Shire, not in Bag End, but in a macabre ruin in the south of Mirkwood Forest called Dol Guldur. That was the year 2850 of the Third Age. That date is not random. Most viewers of Jackson's adaptation have absorbed some version of the necromancer subplot as a parallel story, something happening in the background while the real adventure takes place, a subplot resolved off-screen and barely affecting the dwarves' journey. But here is what Unfinished Tales truly reveals to us in the chapter The Quest of Erebor, where Tolkien recreates Gandalf's own retrospective account of the entire strategic logic of this campaign. Gandalf did not go to Dol Guldur because it was on his way to somewhere else. He went there because he was trying to confirm a conclusion he had envisioned himself. He had observed the evil darkness spreading in Mirkwood for decades. He had seen the darkness moving south through the dense forest, like a slow tide. He had noted how the giant spiders multiplied and moved to places where no spider had ever nested before. The way travelers were disappearing into the forest with no explanation. The way the trees at the southern edge of the forest were withering away from the roots up. Something was wrong, and Gandalf had a specific hypothesis about it. Pay attention to what happened in those dungeons, because in the ruined lower vaults of Dol Guldur, Gandalf found Thorin II, the last living king of Durin's folk from the direct line of the House of Durin, who had disappeared decades prior. Thorin was completely broken and shattered. Many years in the deep pits of the necromancer had taken his name, taken his sanity, taken most of what had made him a king. The necromancer tormented him brutally, not only because he was a dwarf lord, but to strip away a single thing: the last ring of the 7 rings of power of the dwarves. Drained of vitality, Thrain could barely hold himself together long enough to thrust something into Gandalf's hand. A map, a key, the map to the Lonely Mountain, and the key to its secret door. And then Thrain breathed his last. Gandalf emerged from Dol Guldur, carrying not only those keepsakes, but also a confirmed understanding of what he had feared for a long time. The necromancer was Sauron. The darkness in Mirkwood was the Dark Lord returned, recovering, not yet at maximum strength, but silently rebuilding his forces. And here is the question that almost no one wonders about that moment. Why did Gandalf go to Dol Guldur? Not in the general sense of investigating the darkness in Mirkwood, but why go alone? Why go in person? Why take the risk of entering the stronghold of a rising Dark Lord in a mortal body that could be captured, corrupted, and destroyed? An Istari walking into the enemy's fortress alone is absolutely not a routine reconnaissance. It was a life-and-death decision, made with an extremely immense level of personal risk, and it implies that Gandalf had visualized enough of the strategic picture to know that what lay inside that fortress was worth risking his life to go and examine. He suspected, he went to confirm, and what he confirmed was a threat of a specific kind, a threat connecting 2 things he had observed separately for a long time: the ever-growing darkness in the south, and the last giant great worm fast asleep in the north. Because in the year 2850 of the Third Age, Gandalf had come to a strategic assessment that almost no one around him completely grasped. He had come to understand that Smaug and Sauron were not separate problems. They were converging disasters. And he had realized a thing that Tolkien stated clearly in his posthumous writings, where the author wrote not as a storyteller, but as a craftsman, explaining the foundational logic of this fantasy world. Tolkien asserted that without removing Smaug from the board, he believed the beginning of Sauron's victory would lie in the north, not in Gondor, not at the Pelennor Fields, but in the north, because Smaug, alive and ready when Sauron revealed himself and called upon his allies, would be the perfect instrument of devastation. Aerial fire is a type of destruction that no army of men or dwarves or elves could easily resist on the battlefield. Rivendell would be burned down. Dale would be burned down again, this time to never be rebuilt, because there would not be a single survivor left to do the reconstruction work. The Shire, a land that Tolkien made clear, lay entirely undefended and unreachable by most resistance forces, would turn to ashes by the time Frodo Baggins was old enough to become anyone's concern. Gandalf knew this. He had understood that disaster on some level for a very long time. And now, here is the truth that the cinematic films condensed into a footnote. The quest of Erebor did not begin when Gandalf knocked on Bilbo's door. It started about 60 years before that knock, when Gandalf began thinking of Smaug as a strategic problem, and worked backwards from the conclusion he needed, which was the death of the dragon, to find a method that could produce it without triggering the very disaster he was trying to prevent. He was not looking for heroes. He was looking for a solution that had to be indirect, deniable, achieved through chess pieces that would carry out the necessary work without knowing the full purpose of the chessboard. Why not borrow a massive army from the Iron Hills? Gandalf well understood. Sauron's network of eyes and ears surrounded everywhere. Any large-scale military march towards the north would immediately alert the Dark Lord, triggering a disastrous war sooner than expected. What Gandalf needed was a covert infiltration campaign, stealth mission. A remnant group of 13 raggedly dressed dwarves, accompanied by a nameless hobbit thief, searching for a fanciful treasure, would be a pathetic and perfect cover to bypass Sauron's colossal intelligence network. Furthermore, the laws governing the Istari, as Tolkien laid out in Unfinished Tales and in the cosmological architecture of the Silmarillion, absolutely forbade Gandalf from confronting Sauron's minions with direct power. The wizards were not sent to dominate. They were sent to kindle resistance in those who already possessed the will. Gandalf could not appear at the gates of Erebor, look straight into Smaug's eyes, and destroy the evil dragon with a spell. He had to find people who would do what needed to be done without fully knowing what they were doing. Picture this. It is early spring in the year 2941 of the Third Age. A road in the north of Erebor, in the town of Bree, where old roads intersect, and travelers from different directions find themselves at the same inn on the same evening, for reasons that seem like random coincidence but are actually not. A wizard in a grey cloak sits puffing on his pipe in a corner of the Prancing Pony's common room, his probing gaze looking toward the door. He had been looking for something incredibly specific for many years. Not a warrior, not a mage, not someone with the power to slay a dragon in one-on-one combat, because no one with that power existed in the north in this age. He had been searching for a dwarf lord with enough personal pain to nurture a grudge-filled obsession spanning a decade, enough royal blood to command the loyalty of other dwarves, and enough wounded pride that the loss of Erebor and the Arkenstone had never stopped burning in his chest, like a coal that would never go out. He needed a person to whom this mission was not a job, but an identity. Someone who would not turn back when everything became desperate. Someone with a pain great enough to serve as a load-bearing foundation. Thorin Oakenshield stepped through the door, and Gandalf set down his pipe. The negotiation began, and even then, at that first meeting, Thorin did not know at all what Gandalf was plotting. The Dwarf King thought this was a journey to reclaim gold, return home, and restore the self-esteem of his people. Gandalf let him think that, but he did not just use empty words of negotiation. Hidden beneath the grey cloak, Gandalf wore Narya, the ring of fire of the elves. Narya's power did not generate scorching flames, but was to warm growing cold hearts and ignite courage in a world flooded with despair. With that sacred power, Gandalf fanned Thorin's flame of hope, because that blind faith was the only thing that would carry Thorin through the moments where nothing else could. This is not a comfortable portrait of the wizard. It does not match the warm sorcerer who set off fireworks for Hobbit children and told Bilbo that he was looking for someone to share in an adventure. Both of those things are true, but behind that smile is the cold-blooded lucidity of a grand strategist who finalized the chessboard and knew well it would cost the people he truly loved a price in blood and tears. But the strategic picture was even deeper than that. In The Quest of Erebor, Tolkien had Gandalf explain a few things about the timing of his search for Thorin, something that Gandalf described almost as an afterthought in his retrospective account. But it carries a colossal mass of weight when you pause to reflect on it. Gandalf said that he had almost despaired when searching for the appropriate configuration of the puzzle pieces for this campaign. He had searched for years. He had considered other approaches. He had turned the problem over from many angles, and when he met Thorin at the Prancing Pony, that encounter was absolutely not random. He had been looking specifically for Thorin, or someone like Thorin, and he had found him at the exact moment he needed to find him. This means the question of timing was itself strategic. The year 2941 was designated, not because anything particular happened to the dwarves or to Bilbo in that year, but because Gandalf had confirmed enough about Sauron's pace of recovery to understand that the window of opportunity to resolve the northern threat was slamming shut. If the campaign was not launched in that year, that moment could pass forever. He had returned from Dol Guldur. He had the map and the key. He knew what Sauron was building, and he understood with a precision that only a Maiar with his depth of perception could achieve. Smaug and Sauron had now drawn too close in their respective trajectories. Allowing either to continue developing without intervention was no longer an acceptable risk. Now, let's talk about Smaug himself, because to understand what Gandalf was managing, you must understand what the evil dragon truly was. Not the cinematic creature of the adaptation, however phenomenal that portrayal may be. But Smaug in Tolkien's original legendarium, Smaug, the one who had lain on a mountain of gold in the dark for 170 years to scheme. Dragons in Tolkien's legendarium were not simply massive and fire-breathing. The great worms in the north traced their lineage back to Glaurung, the first dragon, bred by Morgoth in the deep pits of Angband in the First Age. And Glaurung was a creature of corrupted will, with vicious, manipulative abilities that went far beyond physical strength. Tolkien described in the Silmarillion how Glaurung could bend perception with his gaze. When confronting the hero Thorin, Glaurung broke his mind with a look that twisted memory and dissolved will. The magic of the giant great worms operated at the level of consciousness itself. They were not just weapons of fire and claw, they were instruments of psychological devastation, operating through direct contact with the inner world of whatever they looked at. Smaug belonged to that lineage. His intelligence in the text of The Hobbit was unmistakable and incredibly disturbing. When Bilbo went down the tunnel, entered the Horde, and began talking to the dragon in the dark, what Smaug did was not simply conversing. He was investigating. He spoke to Bilbo with the patience of a creature that had been thinking about this type of intrusion for a century and a half. I do not know your smell, but if you are not one of those miserable dwarves, do not think I don't know what brought you here. He was mapping the situation in real time. He was executing calculations about who had sent this little creature, what they were hoping to achieve, whether it was a genuine threat or just a controllable nuisance. He probed Bilbo's riddles with the specific purpose of finding the puppeteering framework behind the riddles, the real purpose behind the visit. And importantly, in the middle of the conversation, he did an extremely unusual action that deserves to be carefully dissected. He showed Bilbo his underbelly. He deliberately rolled over and displayed the gem-studded armor covering most of his underside. But in doing so, he also deliberately exposed the single bare vulnerable spot without gems. He exposed that weakness in the dark to a thief he knew well had been sent to act as a spy watching him. Why would a creature with cunning intelligence like Smaug do that? The interpretation that most people carry away from this scene is that Smaug was showing off, wallowing in a vain arrogance. But consider an alternative strategic angle that the logic of this scene actually supports. Smaug had had 170 years to think about what threatened him. He had had a century and a half to calculate which attack methods could succeed and fail. He knew the shape of every obvious threat: a dwarf army, human archers, or an elven host. He had thought about all of those things, but what he was facing in the form of Bilbo Baggins was a variable truly outside his prepared data, something he had never thought of before. And a creature with his level of intelligence, when faced with a new variable, would immediately start wondering, what is this new variable used for? What is the intelligence behind it, trying to find out? And if I understand the intention of the puppeteer, can I use that to deceive? If Smaug had deliberately revealed that bare spot as a psychological counterintelligence maneuver conducted in the darkness of his own horde, then the story would carry a terrifying layer that almost no one discusses. Because the bare spot that Bilbo described to the thrush on the mountainside, the information that reached Bard of Laketown and guided the Black Arrow, was exactly the information that a cunning dragon like Smaug knew full well would be collected and transmitted. The question of whether that was accurate information or a trap created to mislead the enemy into aiming at a spot he had already defended is a question that the text never resolves. It is ambiguous in exactly the way that a sufficiently intelligent creature would throw up a smokescreen. But there was something wrong with that deception plan. If it really was a plan, Bard killed him. The Black Arrow found its target. And the question of why that arrow succeeded is a question that Tolkien answered at the narrative level, thanks to the thrush. But what about the old story, the legend about the bare spot that Laketown had known for generations? How could that legend originate if Smaug had concealed his weakness carefully for a century and a half, unless the legend had existed before Smaug came to Erebor, unless the bare spot was a truth that had been collected about this specific dragon before he took the mountain, possibly by someone who had been close enough to observe it directly. And this is where the haunting central question returns with more weight than ever. Did Gandalf ever stand close enough to Smaug to look into his great eye? The texts never confirm that. The gap is real, and the silence is intentional, but the logic of what Gandalf knew, what he would need to grasp clearly to build the plan he laid out, and the accuracy of his strategic prediction, could not simply come from deducing at a safe distance. He knew too much. He was too certain. He had predicted Smaug's behavior in a war scenario with enough precision to bet a 60-year plan on it and let that plan work. That profound level of understanding regarding the nature and weakness of dragons implies that either a perceptive capability so far beyond human that it approaches the uncanny, which is possible for an Istari of Gandalf's caliber, or intelligence had been gathered at a closer range than any text had ever recorded. Hold that along with what Tolkien tells us about Gandalf's fundamental nature. In the Valaquenta of the Silmarillion, the description of Olorin, before he clothed himself in mortal form and was sent to Middle-earth as Gandalf, was brief but specific. Olorin was the wisest of the Maiar. He walked unseen among the elves and inspired them with fair visions and thoughts of wisdom. He was an entity whose fundamental orientation belonged to perception, geared towards reading through other entities, geared towards understanding the inner world of creatures from the inside, geared towards inspiring rather than coercing. This is the true nature behind the grey cloak. Not the nature of a warrior, not the nature of a scholar, but the nature of a perceiver. The nature of an entity whose greatest capability was understanding other people's minds. Now, ask yourself, what would an entity of that nature do with a dragon? Not fight it, not provoke it. He would observe it, study it, seek to understand it, get close enough by any available path to understand it from the inside, in the specific way that Olorin always understood everything. Not through external analysis, but through a type of profound perceptive reading that was inherently his nature. Close your eyes and visualize this scenario. Not inside the mountain, not inside the horde, not any scene that the official history describes. A moment somewhere in the long drawn-out years before the campaign was launched, somewhere in the northern tracts of Middle-earth, where the roads became silent and the lonely mountain was just a dark mass imprinted against the grey sky. A figure in a grey cloak moved not straight toward the mountain, but walked along its lower slopes. He did not deliberately close in. He was not heading to any specific destination. He was simply present there, present in the way an entity that had existed since before the world was created would be, whole and carrying no preconceptions, reading the landscape exactly the way a musician ponders a piece of music they have agonized over for a very long time. He stood still there for a long time. He felt the temperature difference in the air above the mountain peak. He smelled the scent of old ash on the east wind. He recognized the anomaly in the density of the silence, the way the flocks of birds had abandoned a massive radius around the mountain, the way even the wind seemed to have to take a detour when gliding past the slopes, as if the air itself had learned to be afraid. And somewhere in the depths of the mountain, in the vast warm darkness of the treasure vault, where the evil dragon was lying on the layer of gold accumulated over a century and a half, something slightly stirred at the threshold of sleep, not panicked, not fully awake, just the peripheral awareness of a creature that had never completely stopped listening. That something was standing on the southern slope, something that did not bear the scent of dwarves, did not have the scent of humans or elves or any common creature of the north. Something completely alien to the familiar threats that Smaug had chewed over and over in his dreams for the past 170 years. That presence created in the half-awake mind of the dragon not an identification, but a giant question mark, a category with no name, something so different, to the point that even the millennia-old cunning of the Great Worm could not immediately categorize it into any previously known mold. The grey-cloaked figure stood there silently, then turned on his heel and walked back down the road without bothering to look behind him. He did not need to look back. He had gotten what he needed, not exactly physical data, but a perfect intelligence calibration. Now, let us talk about the White Council. Because that organization and its political actions in the year 2941 tell us a tremendously ruthless truth about the scale of Gandalf's intelligence and how it manipulated the political reality of the wise. The White Council had debated for years about what to do regarding the necromancer in Dol Guldur. Saruman, the head of the council, had continuously swatted away all proposals for a direct attack. He continuously made the sophistry that the necromancer was just some lowly evil spirit and not Sauron, that the peril was being blown out of proportion, and the council should stand down to observe further. He had resolutely defended this argument for many long years, but then suddenly, in the year 2941, the exact same year the quest of Erebor was launched, Saruman unexpectedly reversed his stance and agreed to deploy troops to attack Dol Guldur. That raid drove Sauron to flee for his life from Mirkwood and forced him to retreat to Mordor. The timing of Saruman's U-turn is a mystery that the texts do not completely explain. The appendices imply Saruman had his own dark motives. He was scouring for the One Ring and feared Sauron's ever-growing power would hinder that ambition. But Tolkien also leaves open the possibility that this reversal was a reaction to a new, shocking source of intelligence. And the only source of information in 2941 was Gandalf, who had just escaped from Dol Guldur with conclusive proof of Sauron's identity, while simultaneously feverishly launching the Erebor campaign. A campaign that, if successful, would completely scrap the Northern Dragon chess piece at the exact moment the Council ousted Sauron from Mirkwood. This is absolutely not a random coincidence. This is supreme strategic coordination. Gandalf was operating two fronts on a continental scale simultaneously, managing the timing so that both great calamities would be struck in the exact same year. Sauron was uprooted from the south at the exact moment his strongest firepower in the north, Smaug, was destroyed. The cold accuracy of this coordinated strike proves a strategic vision that Gandalf had orchestrated for many years, and it confirms that his intelligence regarding Sauron's pace of recovery, regarding Smaug's strategic value, and regarding the narrowing window of opportunity was detailed to a terrifying degree. Now, let us return to a detail in the original text of The Hobbit that deserves to be dissected more. When Bilbo stood in the horde talking to Smaug, the dragon growled, "I do not know your smell. I wonder who your invisible friend is." Strategic analysis scholars all agree. Smaug had actually sensed something. He sniffed out that there was a giant intelligence pulling the strings behind this hobbit, a force directing the trip that his ancient wisdom could not classify. He could smell the scent of dwarves outside the cave entrance. He knew they stood there. Using the genealogy stored in his millennial brain, combined with scent and reputation, Smaug even guessed roughly how many there were and which branch of Durin's lineage they belonged to. But the invisible force standing behind this entire campaign, the great intelligence that had arranged the chess pieces and pointed the spearhead straight at the mountain, that was something where Smaug could sense the presence of a hidden string puller, even though he himself could not yet call out the specific name. And here is the logical extrapolation, strictly adhering to all the rules the text has established. If Smaug could, through Bilbo's tiny presence, sense the outline of a great intelligence standing behind, then the possibility that this spiritual perceptive capability had once collided at close range in the opposite direction at some point in the past, is absolutely not a fanciful tale. The dragons belonging to Morgoth's lineage did not just have muscle, they possessed a peculiar telepathic capability, geared towards detecting the source of a threat, reading the deepest nature of any creature that dared to venture near. That was the weapon that made them invincible. When the hero Thorin faced Glaurung, the evil dragon did not just see a warrior holding a sword, it saw right through the pain, guilt, torment, and the most fatal weaknesses in Thorin's soul. And it brought all those wounds out, to mold simultaneously with a cruel precision that no physical observation could ever achieve. The great worms saw through all things. That was the essence of the dark spell they carried. If Gandalf had ever stood within Smaug's range of perception, the dragon certainly would have tried to do the same. It would glare. It would project that dark, perceptive beam at the grey-cloaked figure standing on the slope, or in the shadows at some distance. And it would freeze when it hit, a thing it had never seen in its life. Not the mind of men, not elves, not dwarves, not belonging to any familiar category that its rich killing experience had taught it how to read. It hit something more ancient than all things, a thing wearing the form of a haggard old man, but carrying a bottomless depth, a silent presence that had existed since before this world was formed. When a dark creature created by Morgoth tries to read a deity serving the Valar, it might not clearly see the true nature of the thing it is looking at, but it certainly knows one thing. It is facing an entity beyond its comprehension. And for an intelligent beast like Smaug, that unknown is exactly an emergency warning data point. What would the dragon do with that premonition? The most reasonable answer based on Smaug's nature is he would become extremely cautious. Not exactly afraid, because dragons very rarely know fear, but an alertness calibration, aware that there was a grand element turning the tide that he could not control. And when a cunning creature understands that there is a force beyond its life experience, targeting its existence, it will behave completely differently than when it only has to deal with a bunch of familiar dwarf archers. It would become extremely unpredictable, more erratic, and exponentially more dangerous. It would attack Lake Town not with the authoritative fury of a creature feeling absolutely safe, but with the frantic urgency of a beast realizing time is no longer on its side. Smaug wildly tearing open the mountain and flying off to burn Lake Town was absolutely not the behavior of an invincible being out for a stroll. It was a conditioned reflex to a surrounding situation that it could only vaguely sense, but could not control in any way. He knew the dwarves were stuck in the mountain. He had more than enough power to just lie there. He possessed the extraordinary patience of one who had slept soundly for 150 years. But no, he chose to fly south, unleashing his madness on a mortal city, only to lose his life on the dark lake surface. He was reacting to something much greater, and what he was reacting to was not just the visit of a hobbit thief or the stench of the dwarves. It was the giant shadow of a campaign, converging forces that his ancient wisdom could sniff out, but could not escape. He was terrified. Terrified in the way of a creature possessing unrivaled power, trying to swipe its claws and destroy everything before the door of life and death slammed shut. And this is the ironic tragedy at the core of the story. Smaug's intelligence was genuine. His sharpness was real. He sensed the invisible hand pulling the strings of the campaign in a way that most of the other characters in the story could never do. But he acted completely wrong. He aimed his firepower at a tangible target, at the easy destruction of a human city, instead of aiming at the invisible force that had truly penned his death sentence. At the moment, the black arrow shot straight into the fatal weak point on his chest. The great evil dragon was engrossed in pursuing the wrong enemy, burning the wrong city, and in fact, had already lost completely on the political chessboard a long time ago. Now, let us follow these clues to the destination that the Legendarium has been leading us to since the beginning. because the true weight of this entire argument does not lie in whether there was a literal physical encounter between a grey-clad Istari and an evil dragon on a misty hillside. The true weight lies in the question, what was Gandalf ready to bear, and what grim price did he have to pay to carry it? He used his friends. He exploited the bleeding pain, the torment, and the never-healing wound of Thorin Oakenshield, the loss of the kingdom of Erebor, the Arkenstone, the death of his father and grandfather, as fuel for a violent campaign. He never told Thorin the whole truth. He used the pitiful dwarf warriors who had the right to know that. Their expedition was in fact not to reclaim their home, but to serve a world war that had secretly opened fire. That they were merely sacrificial pawns in a strategic calculus stretching far beyond the mountain and the hoard of gold. He used Bilbo Baggins, the gentlest, most innocent, and most unprepared creature he could find, callously shoving him down a dark tunnel to converse with a monster that could blow him into ash in just the first second of being discovered. Bilbo was exploited precisely because of his innocence and his peculiarity, the only thing lying outside Smaug's data, making him a useful card. Gandalf manipulated all of them, and he did so because the harsh laws governing his Istari nature forced him to have no other path. He could not draw a sword and slay the dragon himself. He could not descend before the mountain and use divine power to obliterate the evil dragon. He had to mold the bloody puzzle pieces to fit together to create a life or death outcome without violating the supreme principle of the Creator. The free will of the peoples of Middle-earth must be maintained. He could not force. He could only arrange. Picture a peaceful afternoon. Somewhere in the Shire many years later, the mountain had been reclaimed. Bilbo returned home with a chest of gold and was considered an eccentric by his neighbors. A grey-clad figure sat warming himself by the fireplace in a comfortable hobbit hole. Bilbo, a middle-aged hobbit who had witnessed horrors that no one in this countryside believed were real, quietly poured 2 cups of tea. They chatted animatedly about mundane things, the small garden, today's weather, and the excellent quality of the pipeweed. Then, a tranquil silence fell. An understanding silence dragged on between the intermittent sentences, the way old soulmates usually do. And somewhere in the depths of that silence, each carried a heavy thought that they well knew the other was also hiding. But no one spoke. Bilbo never asked what the true purpose behind the cruel chessboard of yesteryear was, and Gandalf did not bother to open his mouth to justify. There are questions that do not need to be brought into the light to be resolved with words. They are only gradually sensed through the weight of what remains and is not burned by fire. The most painful tragedy does not lie in the fact that Gandalf was wrong. The tragedy is that his cruel calculation was completely correct. If not for the death of Smaug in 2941, the fiery War of the Ring could never have taken place. Rivendell needed to be intact to become the meeting place for the Council of Elrond, not a pile of ashes. Dale needed to be reborn as a steel fortress to halt Sauron's northern army in the final battle, and the lush green Shire needed to be protected intact, long enough so a special hobbit could grow up and shoulder a mission of destruction. All those cosmic destinies were suspended on the fact that an evil dragon was compelled to die in a dark lake in the north at the exact moment of life and death. And Gandalf had single-handedly woven that death sentence using the only materials he could use: the pain, the courage, and the ignorance of others. He knew he was doing the right thing. He understood that better than anyone, but he also had to swallow the torment himself, knowing clearly the price that the people he truly loved had to pay. He loved them sincerely, but love and cold-blooded strategic calculation existed in parallel in his mind, without canceling each other out. That is exactly the moral weight that Tolkien always wanted to depict, not a black and white villainy, not a cheap heroism, but rather the bloody price of wisdom, of seeing through the future and being forced to take action using tools of life, even though one's heart is writhing in pain. And here, as we step down the final stairs of the original text's dungeon, the central question echoes back, carrying a heavy weight of 1,000 pounds more than ever. Did Gandalf ever stand close enough to Smaug to look straight into that sharp gaze? And if he really stood there, what did the dragon see when glaring back? The only answer that the legendarium allows us to visualize is, no matter what the evil dragon Smaug saw, it would still be an entity that did not have a name in its millennial treasure trove of experiences. A spiritual presence predating even the proud lineage of dragons, predating the slimy breeding pits of Angband, predating the first fall of Lord Morgoth. An entity that had strolled in the timeless halls of the Valar gods since when this universe was merely an invisible musical note. Something that completely did not know the fear of flames, not because it was stronger than fire, although in fact it was, but because it was absolutely not the mundane material that fire could lick and burn. The Maiar did not bear mortal bodies in the way human life is limited. Olorin, even though cloaked in the form of a wrinkled old man, his soul remained a primordial deity. The glare of a dragon could tear apart and twist the minds of elves or dwarves, but it was completely harmless against a being whose inner world was not imprisoned by a fragile shell of flesh. What Smaug might have seen in that proximate moment was an entity absolutely impossible to be shattered when glared at, a silent, complete, and wholly inviolable existence. And for a dark creature whose power was built upon manipulating and sowing terror into the minds of others, encountering something impossible to be made to fear was perhaps the most chilling and haunting experience in its entire great millennial life. We will perhaps never have a definitive answer. J.R.R. Tolkien took that secret with him into eternity, but the very silent gaps he intentionally left open are the things that create the greatness of this legendarium. Darkness does not obscure the story. It is a launch pad for the light of truth to burn brighter and more hauntingly. The quest of Erebor was never an epic, praising the courage of slaying dragons or the glory of seizing treasure. Under the naked lens of history, it was a life and death sentence, penned by a wizard, carrying the burden of vision on his shoulders. Gandalf used the bleeding pain of the dwarves, the innocent purity of the Hobbit, and the wildly arrogant pride of the evil dragon, to forge a shield, protecting the whole world. He quietly swallowed all the remorse and carried all that torment into the darkness, because silence was exactly the blood price that this chessboard demanded. And the great evil dragon Smaug, the proudest creature of the North, breathed his last breath without ever knowing that both his life and his death lay neatly within the absolute manipulation of a string puller. The posthumous writings of Tolkien have closed, but the questions will echo forever. And now is the time I want to listen to the judgments from you yourselves. From your perspective, did Gandalf ever step close enough to see through the fiery eye of Smaug? If so, what terrifying entity do you think the evil dragon saw from the abyss when it glared back? And more importantly, Gandalf's cold manipulation toward the people he loved. Is it a great sacrifice worthy of veneration or a terrifying cruelty? Engrave your perspectives and analysis down in the comments section. Hello, and see you again in the next episodes on the Mythos Archive.